Hi, folks. Welcome to Friday, which should be Hat Friday. I've got an excuse. I can't put a hat on. You lot have no excuses.
I've got a big fat head and very few hats that fit it.
I'm not getting up to get a hat.
Well, welcome to Friday's non-hat edition of the I Write Radio podcast, Videocast. Sorry I couldn't be with you yesterday, but I had half the NHS to speak to. So all good though, all good results. Our NHS is wonderful. We're going to have a chat about Nicola Sturgeon's press conference, where she had Jason Leach and the Chief Constable, and some technical problems as well, which unfortunately didn't manage to get rid of the sun, but there you go. And we're going to have a chat about a piece Joe Cherry did in the National and a piece from the new Statesman from Chris Deerin. And I'm sure there'll be other things coming to it. Stuart, what did you think the presser today?
Presser. I'm always impressed when Jason Leach turns up because he's good value for money, and no wonder he does the voiceover for quite a bit of their advertising, public service advertising on the telly, doesn't he? And sometimes he sees face. The Chief Constable was there as well, and we'll come to that in a moment because there was an incident all over social media last night. What can I say? Stay at home. We've got to the point where some of the data that we're seeing reflects what happened over Christmas. And unfortunately, we've now got more people in hospital than we had in the April spring peak last year, which is pretty dreadful. We've also had a fairly dreadful 93 deaths reported, which, as the First Minister said, it doesn't reflect the people who died yesterday, it reflects the people who died over the period, because there were quite a lot of days where the registry offices weren't open.
Well, let's hope that's the case.
Yeah, well,
she'll know, I suppose.
I can't take heart for the numbers, though, Norrie. They've no jumped in the way that they have in other parts of the country. You know, in terms of daily cases, and I know the hospitalisations have gone up, but it's been a gradual increase. It hasn't been a huge jump as we've seen in London and the southeast, and also in the northwest of England. So I think the numbers are probably right now. It'll be interesting. Obviously, that could all change in the next few days, but right now, I think the numbers are saying that Nicola Sturgeon done the right thing by locking us all down on Boxing Day. And the week previous to Christmas, she was basically indicating that that was going to be the case. So I think she's done the right thing, mate, and the numbers are bearing that out now.
I do think she's taken full advantage of the geographical advantage. You know, we're lucky we're in the north, not the south.
Yeah, that happened last year, and we remember well, I think was it June, the entire month of June, where we had no deaths, June or July, whatever one it was. But again, we were talking about eradication of the virus at that point. But I think they have, you're right, they've taken advantage of the geographical thing, and also the fact that it did, particularly this new variant, it did appear in London and the southeast first, and we managed to no stomp on it, but certainly put in place measures that hopefully are curtailing its spread.
Yeah. I noticed the percentage, right? So it was 2,309 more infections, but it was only 8.1% of those tested, which was quite a drop.
Yeah, it was
like 16-18%.
Yeah, it was 15% only on Tuesday or Wednesday.
I was thinking that, yeah.
Which was and a lot more testing as well, of course, now than there was.
April. One of the things that's controversial the last couple of days is this international travel ban. And anything that's all the rules that are mentioned at the moment, I'm just going to say that everything is now covered by law. It doesn't matter what you bring up, it's apparently every time everything's covered by law.
You can have views on that. I think they're bullshitting when it comes to that, but that's neither here nor there. As long as people as long as they're getting a decent level of adherence to the regulations in that, then I think whether it's actually law or whether they're saying it's law is neither here nor there.
But they're still, as far as I can see, they've look, the only excuse she's got about the international travel ban not being in beforehand is it was a reserved matter. But she's not been prepared to make a big issue of things that are reserved.
Yeah,
I think that I don't see how she can. I mean, all that would happen is the, shall we say, extremer elements of the indie movement would be screaming, "Just take control of the borders."
yeah. I think
be headlined all over the country.
I
It
think
can't
you're right,
be done without agreement. I mean, if you can't fly into Scotland, you fly into Manchester and get a bus up.
I think if the bottom line, I think you're right there. Boris has that. It's not within his gift. Boris has that power, and if Boris isn't going to exercise that power, there's no real upside for her to really be complaining about it, because she would get absolutely destroyed in the mainstream media if she came in and said, "I want to shut the airport," and Boris wouldn't let me.
And regardless of whether the decision was the right decision or not.
I noticed, I'm going to be anecdotal here this morning, when I was out for a walk, because the weather was fine, and there seemed to be quite a lot of planes flying into Edinburgh Airport. That's only anecdotal.
I think I've not had a look, but there has been 14 to 20 flights a day going into Edinburgh. Nothing like what's coming into Heathrow, obviously, but I think as well, I was out this morning, and I would say, again, it's anecdotal, but there's definitely more movement than there was last March, April. Just with the fact that I remember standing outside my door having a fag and watching the buses going past with nobody on them. That's not the case now.
That was one of the questions she was asked today, and she was saying they are monitoring traffic flow. It's difficult. It is difficult. I mean, I'm absolutely certain that there'll be more businesses operating than there were in the first lockdown, because the first lockdown, everybody was told, we're going to lock down for a month and it's all going to be fine. So
to some extent,
that's not what happened. And businessmen are sitting there going, lockdown or no lockdown, I've got to survive.
I've got bills to pay here, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at that. I would say that just for looking around and taking a look at pictures from the town centre and what have you, there's definitely quite a high level of adherence. So
I was thinking about, I was nearly went down to Portobello rather than went down to the Western Harbour where I normally go for my walk. Just out of nosiness, I wasn't planning to join the crowds, because it does get awfully busy down there on days like this. Everybody wants to walk up and down the prom, and that is totally actually against the spirit of the lockdown.
It is, mate, but they're also horses' butts because it's Baltic today. Our good friend Miss Hill will probably have been in the sea this morning, because she's one of those maddos who likes to have an early morning dip in the Forth, but more power to her elbow, as I say.
Well, I decided it was nice weather to take a photograph as well as go for a walk. So I went and I did a message. So I ended up at Silver Nose.
All right.
And I was lucky to get parked. There were hundreds of cars down there. The cafe was doing business. That's that click and collect, is it?
No, he
assumed they were doing business.
Technically, it's carry out, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is carry out, because he doesn't. He asks people not to use his outdoor seating. He's actually quite a character, that boy. He's been. His Facebook's quite entertaining to follow, but it's quite selfish, shall we say, as to his opinion on Edinburgh City Council not opening Silverhouse Road, for example.
I know that.
Frankly, he wants it open so he can get more business.
Well, it seems such a shame, because there was nobody running the place for years. It wasn't open. And the guy made the effort, invested his money, and it's quite, okay. Anyway, can we move on?
Well, I'd like to highlight a point of information, I suppose. Jason Leach, who's very good, gets the message across very well, was passed a question from the First Minister about the mixing of the various different vaccines, and summed up why it wasn't important, the name of the vaccine, I thought very well, by saying it's not an AstraZeneca antibody, it's a COVID antibody. So if whichever injection you get produces the antibody you need, it doesn't matter if you mix them.
Aye, I'd agree with you there. I think the press are, like on a lot of things, I think the press have been rather mischievous around the vaccine. So it was nice to get that information out there and get it out in a clear and lucid manner that most people could easily understand.
Seems quite sensible to say, you know, why would you mix two different vaccines? And that's the first time I've heard it put in terms that are easily understood.
Yeah. My first impression when the news first came out was, oh yeah, that sounds a bit odd. I'd want to know more. Well, now I know more, and Jason Leach made it very clear.
Yeah.
It's
about what the vaccine creates, i.e. the antibody, not the vaccine, which vaccine it is that does the creation. That was my high point of today as far as information goes.
I've got a possibly controversial point. The Dalbeattie Star football team.
Oh, absolute nonsense. The First Minister should have just told that fanny to go and find another question to ask.
And they're not happy about having to play their games and travel around.
Well, they're different from full-time professional footballers. They're part-time professional footballers. They have other jobs.
The reality of that
at night, they don't live in a hotel.
The reality of that
situation
is they're being asked to adhere to the same rules as professionals, though. You know, Dalbeattie Star, I don't know who they've got in the cup this weekend, but Dalbeattie Star, for example, wouldn't be able to put the team on one bus. They'll probably have to have two buses. So I understand fully that they have issues and have problems. Why on earth a guy from Border TV thinks that Nicola Sturgeon is going to have knowledge or will be able to answer a question about those problems, I have no idea. And as I say, presumably Border TV, when he put him up to ask a question for the next few days, because that was just utter fanny. Fuddery.
It struck me that it, rather than it being the angle we've discussed so far, the part-time players possibly don't want to go.
Well, that was the gist of the that was essentially what he was saying, that it was the players that were worried, which I think is a positive. It's nice to think these guys are thinking about it, not only the risk to themselves, but the fact
risk to their families.
Carry it.
I think the
all
journalist
over Scotland.
I think the journalist was talking abject shite. It's the Scottish Cup second round, mate. Every amateur, every semi-professional player would be delighted to play a second round tie, because if they get through it, they get one of the big guns, hopefully in the third round.
I
would imagine every one of the players will be delighted to play that game on Saturday, and it's the club secretary who's having to pay for two buses that's the one that's complaining.
We also learned a little bit about, what was the silly question, the guy from Derek from the Courier, any evidence of where transmission is actually happening? And the answer was basically you can't tell when it's community transmission like it is now. When there's a low prevalence, you can identify where the outbreaks are and test it down. And that's the situation they've got in Australia at the moment. They're still in that kind of situation, 3 dead, whereas we had 93 dead.
Well, can I have £1 for every time a version of that question was asked? Because it'll get me a wee weekend away after lockdown's finished.
It's interesting. I think yesterday and today we've definitely seen a bit of electioneering for the Sun. They're desperately trying to trip the First Minister up or something. Yesterday, Chris Musson he got under her skin a wee bit because she absolutely tore him to shreds yesterday.
What? I missed it yesterday. What was the question?
I can't even remember, mate. It was antsy. He was having a pop at her personally, blaming her for stuff, and she absolutely went to town on him and pointed out why he's a hack journalist for the Sun and why she's First Minister. She absolutely took him to school, tore him to shreds, and his mate today got similar kind of treatment when he was trying to go on about nosocomial infections, and she pointed out, well, you kind of know about nosocomial infection because we publish it every week, and you ran a big bloody story on it at the weekend.
Yeah, exactly. She came across as bit more informed of what was in his paper than he was.
But I saw something about Musson shouting at her.
He did. He came back because he didn't like the answer to the question, and that kind of riled her. So that was when she went to town. Basically pointed out, hold it, I'm a lawyer, I'm a successful politician. There's a reason you're writing puff pieces for the shittiest tabloid in the country, son. Don't have a pop at me, or I will point out what an arse you are.
I'll have to take the time to look at it.
I think you may have given me my headline, puff pieces for the shittiest tablet. But there was one item which you could say was totally tabloid, which was social media incident, which was shared on social media last night. I don't know if you saw it, Norrie, did you?
I didn't. I totally missed this.
You see it, Jimmy?
No, I was too busy drinking rum and ignoring the world, mate.
It was obviously on a phone camera. There was a young woman and a man at the door, and someone else in the house with a camera. The two police officers arrived. They came in, and the woman was immediately abusive while they were standing there. Go away, this is a private house, you're not allowed to come in. And it then developed into we'll call it a scuffle, which is a very topical word, is it not? And it looked quite violent, but the Chief Constable, I suppose that's why he was there today, but although I actually thought he was meant to be there to talk about domestic abuse because of the lock-in.
He did his bit on domestic abuse. What I found interesting about that answer was immediately went to, oh, so you've got camera footage of this. Well, we've got body camera footage of this.
Yeah.
That will show you the whole
And he was prepared to describe, he said we'd had complaints from neighbours, there was an ongoing house party. 3 adults have been charged, body cameras, as you say. And he even hinted that these were deniers. He hinted that they were refusers. It wasn't just that they were having a party. It was a case of, you've no right.
They're part of the bampots that believe all the nonsense that they see on Twitter and Facebook then. Good.
Do we know if Police Scotland have rights of entry under the coronavirus?
They don't, mate, because the police in England have been asking for enhanced rights of entry over the last week or so. It's something that I've noticed a couple of articles on it. And it does worry me because the right of entry for police officers, they've got the same right of entry actually as anything else, mate. If they think, that's why I didn't think they need more powers. If they think there's a crime occurring within your house, they will come through the door regardless of whether you invited them in or not.
Well, it's actually not that simple, Jimmy. I mean, it always amazed me that the fire brigade had better right of entry or more rights of entry. I mean, basically, if we smell smoke, we can go anywhere.
Aye.
If they smell smoke, they can go anywhere they want as a public safety thing.
Mind you, if you turned up outside a house and there was loud music, and you can also hear people's voices, can't you, outside a house where there's a party going on? That would probably be prima facie evidence.
I'll be interested to see what happens if they've charged them. They've probably got pretty decent evidence on the body cams for charging them in the first place. So,
well, they're being charged with assault.
Oh, good.
And a breach.
That's never a good idea to put your hands on a copper, unless you're going to actually put your hands on a copper that heavily that he can't arrest you. I shouldn't have said that.
Now,
just while we're on the police, can we just point out that our erstwhile friend and Mark Hirst got his case dismissed yesterday?
Good news for Mark. Well,
I hope the same thing happens with Craig Murray.
But no case to answer.
No case to answer, mate. Yes, that's what the judge. That was the thing that his lawyer put forward, and the judge agreed with it because the language that he used, wasn't. Yeah. Well, what I wrote down, mate, is this just a case of some wee brown nose crawling up Lady Dollian's crevice, some wee ball bag who wants to get advanced in the Crown Office at Chambers Street and has crawled up Lady Dollian's arse by bringing this case? Because that's the kind of people that we end up with in the Crown Office, isn't it?
It seems to be, I mean, my understanding from the police that I know, they hate the Crown Office because what they consider perfectly legitimate cases, the Crown Office refused to take them on because they don't consider there's enough evidence or whatever. That seems to have changed, at least when it comes to certain cases, that they're going to proceed with it regardless of it.
You mean political cases?
Can we call? No, I'm not sure we can call them political.
Oh, I think we can.
Well, there was certainly, there was certainly a degree of incredulity that Mark Hirst and Craig Murray were charged and brought to court, and Danny Garivelli and her wee gang of unionists, who, as far as anybody, and I mean anybody that I've spoke to that's read her article, thinks there was far more chance of identifying one of the alphabet women from her piece than Craig Murray's. And the Mark Hirst one, threatening behaviour, don't give me. That was laughable that even got taken to court.
Well, that's kind of my point. It seems there's a much lower bar.
Nori, I've said a hell of a lot worse here. A hell of a lot worse than what he said.
But it's okay. I put a disclaimer in all the time.
Yeah.
You've allegedly said.
Yes, allegedly said. Look, it's also relevant that Mark Hirst works for a Russian-owned news agency.
Yeah. It's
a
very
Russian-owned
noticeable.
News agency
Called Sputnik.
He's put a lot of stuff. He publishes quite a lot on Sputnik.
I thought Sputnik was privately owned.
Oh, yeah, okay, a private, Russianly owned.
Right. So it depends what country the capitalist comes from.
Nah, he's also been known to do some material for Russia Today for the Alex Salmond show.
No, I'm actually only joking.
Well,
you're going.
Let's be honest, mate. He's probably one of the better journalists on Sputnik when you think he's got stable mates with the old Mr. Sheridan.
Do you know, I have never read a piece by Tommy Sheridan on Sputnik.
I've read a couple, mate, but I stopped because I couldn't help hearing his voice in my head when I was reading it, and the last thing I want to hear is Tommy Sheridan's bloody ranting.
Well, I can read what he says because without hearing his voice. But you're right about his voice. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you talk about Tommy Sheridan, what about George Galloway? He's poked his deputy's been causing trouble this week, is it?
Yeah, I was surprised at the time he printed that.
The Times must be getting desperate.
Yeah, I think
they're not having to pay him or something.
I would imagine he didn't get paid for that but the language in it was incendiary. You know, if you're going to start calling people what he wants to call people, frankly, I can't wait to see him on the campaign trail because I've got a few choice words for him that I won't say here because he wouldn't be able to broadcast them.
I see George Galloway was asking for more money again as well.
That's a surprise.
He must be running out.
So that's the only thing he's campaigned for in the last 2 decades, mate. His bank balance.
What's have you got a name for this deputy so that people can?
He's a landowning ex-guardsman. I think he was in the guards.
He was Jamie something or other. I think I can't quite remember now.
You could be right. And I see the guy they called Manky Jacket, who turns up at every pro-independence march. There was a piece with him on the streets of Kirkcaldy, upsetting people.
A force for good. He's just a lunatic, mate. He's best ignored. When you get kicked out of UKIP for being too extreme, that kind of puts you into a category all of your own. Ball bag, flood whip, whatever you want to call him. He's best. I think that the silent Klansman does it best by standing in front of him with very headphones on. That's just about the level that he did.
He went to the same school for his elocution as Fraser Nelson as well. He's got the weirdest accent.
Mate, he's absolutely been losing it over the winter. You should see a couple of videos he put. He looked like Alvin fucking Stardust. He's got the hair all slicked back and the leather jacket, and he looks like Alvin Stardust, 1970s pedo.
He's a kind of UKIP wannabe, or well, maybe worse than that. Maybe the
Well,
National Front wannabe.
Who was it? He got tossed. Was it UKIP that he got thrown out of for being a Holocaust denier? I think it might have been UKIP, might have been the Brexit, but it was one of these extremist idiot groups that he got kicked out of for being a Holocaust denier. So anybody that denies the Holocaust even happened is a clown.
Well, I will give him his due for being consistent. He's been at every march, I think, that's ever been marched for independence.
Do you remember the early Urban Welsh stuff?
Yeah.
There was a character called Dressed by His Mark. That's who this boy reminds me of. Dressed by His Mark. Anyway, can we go into Chris Deerin so we can have a pop at him, Norman?
Yeah, we can do. I don't know what Stuart's doing. Chris Deerin wrote a piece in the New Statesman. Chris Deerin is a unionist. And up until a few months ago, I would say he was an ultra-unionist. Then he kind of, I don't know, he started to talk a little bit of sense, and instead of simply denigrating any independence supporter that he could find, he started apparently to think about it seriously. But he's written this piece in the New Statesman that, well, Jimmy, I'll give you first pop at this.
I started reading it and I thought, oh, it's just another piece by somebody who doesn't understand Scotland at all. And then it got worse. I mean, there's a paragraph there where he talks about Gordon Brown having the respect to Scottish people and the perfect person to lead the campaign for the union. And I'm like, what part of Scotland have you ever been in? I mean, Gordon Brown has no respect in London. We know that. He has equally no respect in Scotland. He's making him out to be some kind of political heavyweight that can, I mean, seriously, are we meant to, you're looking at about 7 in 10 people in Scotland believe there should be a referendum, and around 6 in 10 would vote yes in that referendum. We're going to be talked down for that by an ex-Prime Minister who nobody listens to, who has promised the earth to Scotland twice before and delivered absolutely nothing. It's a nonsense, and I can't believe Chris Deerin actually believes that.
Allowing for the fact it's the New Statesman, it's this other position he takes that Labour are somehow important in Scotland.
Yeah.
They're not. They're the third party in Scotland. And he talks about them like they're the official opposition at Holyrood.
I think it kind of come across to me as if you're right. He's not reading the room at all. But the only way, for example, I think Labour could finish second in the next election because, let's be honest, during the campaign we're going to batter Ruth Davidson and batter Douglas Ross because they are both lightweights. Ruth Davidson, cheerio, take your 350 quid. Why are you standing campaigning? You have nothing to do with this election. Go away. And Douglas Ross is a nothing. He's a school bully and a crap linesman, and he will be shown up in the campaign trail as an absolute clown. So Labour could finish second, but if they do, they'll still finish 30 points behind the SNP, which makes them irrelevant.
I can't see it.
Yeah, I think the Tories could have a disastrous campaign, but do we really think that Labour are going to have anything better, mate, with Richard Leonard running it?
Do you know why I think? I was going to say that the journalist down south, but is Chris Deerin not Scotland based?
I think he is based up here, mate. Yeah.
Well, but the reason I think they think that Brown's got any gravitas is he acts like he has. You don't get to question him.
But he's still a go-for name from London media, world media even. He was a Prime Minister, don't forget, and he's still alive.
Yeah, but we don't care.
They have absolutely no respect for him in Westminster and in London. All right, they might be interested in the fact that he's an ex-Prime Minister, but they have no time for him whatsoever. We're meant to have respect for him because he speaks in a Scottish accent.
Well, I think it's because he acts like he's important. When was the last time you saw him under any pressured questioning?
None. And let's
Doesn't
be honest,
happen.
It's because like every other ex-Prime Minister, he's made a lot of money since he was Prime Minister. So when he holds an event, he books a nice big posh room and he he gets rent a crowd in there to clap him, and he stomps up and down as if he's, you're right, he acts like he's still an important figure. But the reality is, take a look at that. He's hired the room, he's hired the crowd, and he's handpicked the journalists that are going in there to ask him tough questions. That's not an important man. That's somebody who wishes he still was. It's a self-important man.
And I do like the idea that they think he could lead the unionist side.
More power to the elbow. If that's going to be the man that they're going to put up in a campaign, I'm delighted at that.
How's he going to lead the unionist side with a federalist stance?
Chris Deerin mentions that as well towards the end. He talks about this, the F word, federalism. And as we've said before, there is no amount of federalism England will accept. The amount of federalism they'll accept is the federalism they have now, which is complete control over the United Kingdom. That's the only federation they want.
The only federalism I can see the English accepting is when Scotland is on a par with Yorkshire.
Well, that's never going to happen, is it?
Exactly.
That's what they'll view as federalism.
It was nice to juxtapose that article with the one that Joanna Cherry done. Stuart, you read that one, and I'd imagine you were pretty impressed by it.
Yeah, well, I mean, she even refers back to her period as a young Scottish nationalist with Ian Blackford and John Swinney, and how during that period of a sort of divide in the SNP, she went off and joined the Labour Party for a bit and then came back. But she also refers back to the possibility in the 90s when, the period up to before the referendum, when devolution was agreed, and how Alex Salmond and Donald Dewar did a deal so that Salmond supported the plan for a devolved parliament only on the grounds that it secured a concession. Alex secured a concession that nothing in the Scotland Act would preclude the people of Scotland from subsequently choosing an independent future. And this concession is recorded in Hansard. Alexa, stop.
I do love the fact that your tech's heckling you in the background, mate. That's quality.
Oh dear. And which brings us very nicely to I think this is going to be a key issue in the course of this campaign. What is now known as the Marr question. What Marr said is, what is different from the English wanting to leave the EU and being allowed to have a referendum, and Scots who want to leave the UK but not being allowed to have a referendum?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question for a unionist politician to find a reasonable answer to that.
I thought the Marr question was, what democratic route have Scots got to get independence?
Well, it comes to the same thing, I think. But there is I agree with you, Norrie. I think that's what I thought it was. But I'm just quoting Joanna Cherry's version of it.
I like the fact that Joanna Cherry, I've seen parts of her article as a shot across the bow, not only to the leadership of the party, but to their apologists, the likes of Pete Wishart and that. I like the fact that she told them that the route that we're going down at the moment with no options other than a Section 30 is both foolish and dangerous. And I like that choice of language and how she laid it out. And I also like the fact that she referred us to a century ago and how Ireland achieved its freedom by negotiating with the British Parliament, because they had the majority of MPs were nationalists and were determined to remove Ireland from the United Kingdom. And it does succinctly point to the simple fact it has happened before. A member state of the United Kingdom has left, and because of the terrible way that Westminster negotiated that, we've had a civil war in Ireland and an ongoing civil war in the north for a long, long time. And we are in a similar situation. I don't think for a second that there'd be civil war, but there would be massive civil disobedience at some point if we are held in the UK in a manner that the Irish weren't.
Well, I mean, that's my stance. renegotiate the Treaty of Union.
Well, the process was fairly straightforward. It would have been what you might call the Thatcher process, which was that the Irish, the majority of Irish seats in the Commons were held by nationalists. They withdrew from the Commons and sat in Dublin, and which forced the British government to negotiate.
You have to remember, though, that they were negotiating with David Lloyd George, who is a hell of a bigger man than Boris Johnson could ever be.
Goodness me, yeah. But look, here's a quote. Look, the treaty is in legal and constitutional terms, she's a lawyer, a clear precedent which shows that a constituent part of the UK can leave and become independent by a process of negotiation after a majority of pro-independence MPs win an election in that constituent part. You know, we've got that situation. How many mandates have they had now?
Yeah.
Well, we don't have that situation at Holyrood.
I know, but she's saying it's not Holyrood's only been there for 20 minutes. 20 minutes.
20 years.
It's only been there for 20 years, whereas it's a Treaty of Union that applies.
Yeah, I think that was quite clever, because on the off chance that the SNP don't win a majority of seats in Holyrood next year, which I think is very unlikely looking at the polls at the minute, but on that off chance, Joanna is saying, regardless of what happens, we are in the position to negotiate because we have the majority of MPs. Perhaps she might even be hinting that if the SNP don't win that majority, she might be hinting that it's time to withdraw from Westminster, sit in Edinburgh, have our own parliament here, and our parliamentarians from Westminster, and say to London, pop up and negotiate when you feel ready.
I mean, the quote is worth it. Again, it is short-sighted to view the question of how we might lawfully end a consensual union of two sovereign nations, which is more than 300 years old, only through the prism of devolution, which has been with us for barely 2 decades and is not the last word on the constitutional relationship between Scotland and England.
So effectively, if I say it, it doesn't count.
Yes.
But if
Norrie,
Cherry says it, it counts.
Norrie,
she's the lawyer.
I would suggest that there's slightly more nuance in Joe's position, but I think you're right. You've held this position for donkeys. Renegotiation of that union is the way. Aye. And
because what it does, it gives you another baseball bat, another Marr question. If it's okay for you to renegotiate, if it's okay for you to leave the EU, why isn't it okay for Scotland to leave the UK? If it's okay for every single prime minister since we joined the EU to renegotiate the treaty that we signed to join, why can't we renegotiate for the first time in 300 years the Treaty of Union?
It's also the recognised path that David Cameron took in only 5 years ago. You know what I mean? He went into Europe, renegotiated, came back, offered a referendum, and the people rejected what he'd renegotiated. So it's good for David Cameron. How's it not good for us?
It's doubling down on the argument. Oh, it's okay for Westminster to have those rights, but not for Holyrood. Why? What's lesser about the Scottish Parliament?
Yeah, that's more about
us. That's what the answer. That's the answer that they won't give. But that's what's lesser. Scots are lesser than Englishmen. Englishmen can renegotiate contracts. Scots aren't allowed to.
Well, that's a campaigning case. And you're right, Norrie, about it being a shot across the bows of the leadership. On January 24th, now we're on the 8th, it's a fortnight on Sunday, an SNP Virtual National Assembly will take place to discuss the tactics and strategy on the route from here to Independence Day. And our final sentences, that such a strategy is needed because it may be required is in fact a no-brainer. In her speech of January 31st, 2020, Hogmanay, the First Minister was careful not to rule out other routes out of the question.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you know, the other thing that popped into my head when I read that, Joanna Cherry is clearing the decks. Yes, I was a member of the Labour Party, but it was because Salmond, etc., got thrown out of the SNP.
Yeah.
I'm putting it all on the table now so that when I do stand for leadership,
Norrie,
finish that sentence any way you want, lads.
Norrie, you're right. It's also, something came into my head there and it's just jumped to, just when you were talking about clearing the deck. It's also very good timing to remind people that the former leader and former First Minister was thrown out of the SNP at one point. He was ostracised. He was seen as disloyal. And look where he took us. It's a clever, clever thing to associate ourselves just ever so slightly with a former First Minister.
I do see our positioning ourselves as a candidate, shall we put it that way?
Well, the very last thing she says, sorry, Jimmy, the very last thing she says is, right, the First Minister was careful not to rule out other routes out of the question. Others would do well to follow her lead. So that suggests that she's been held prisoner by other people who are more determined not to change on the Section 30.
Yeah.
Jimmy?
I would suggest that that's a hint to, as I said, her Nicola's party loyalists and also those within the SNP offices. I was going to say Charlotte Square, but I didn't think they're in Charlotte Square anymore.
Something wined, isn't it?
Aye, they're at the back of the Parliament.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I'm very glad that the high Hegians and the SNP now totally agree with me.
Have you had them doing for a fly-wee bevy?
I couldn't admit
their ways, Norrie.
Couldn't admit if it was true, Jimmy.
No, you must have been speaking to Ben then, were you?
Well, MI5 haven't sent me my check, so until I get my check for my report, I'm not allowed to say anything.
Yeah, no, aye. And on that cheery note, are we going to Foxtrot, Oscar?
I think so.
I have one thing held back. We discovered from the Chief Constable that the Metropolitan Police, with a population of 9 million to handle, issued only 2,000 fines over the course of this pandemic for breaches of the rules, whereas the Police Scotland, with 5 million of a population, issued 7,000. I don't know why we wanted us to know that, but he did.
Police state. That'll be a headline.
I'm no fan of that, if I'm honest. I do hate police when they start monetising misbehaviour and misdemeanours. Police Scotland have had a good track record in not doing such a thing, but this would appear to have gone by the wayside during this pandemic.
Well, he sounded proud of it.
Yeah, I think he probably is, mate. It's a hell of a lot of money to raise,
Do they get to trouser the money?
I believe they trouser about half of it, mate, and the rest goes on. I think they get virtually off, because it goes on backroom admin, mate.
No, it actually goes to London, believe it or not. Fines.
They do, yeah. I knew that. Which is why I don't object to people not paying their fines. Bugger it.
That's another one we could talk about.
Okay, I think we've just about exhausted everything. That's interesting. I don't believe that. I'm sorry, I'm sure that he made a mistake there. It should have been 200,000, not 2,000.
I'm pretty sure if he was going to stand up that he's made sure his figures, mate.
Well, we'll see. Thanks for being with me, Jimmy Hutton, Stuart Lockhead.
Bye-bye.
Stuart. Thanks for listening, folks, and we'll catch you on Sunday. Excuse me.